And the very final section of ACORN, the N, is the need to connect. And again, I have some technical industries that I work with. I have students in my MBA classes that are like, Dr. Scott, we don't need to connect. What are we going to do, talk about fluffy bunnies and butterflies? We don't need all that emotion. Well, we're not going to talk about fluffy bunnies or butterflies, but we absolutely have to connect with each other. We have to connect if we're going to persuade. Again, the definition of persuasion is moving toward a new belief or action. We need to be moved by the argument. Facts alone will win the argument, but they won't move people to change. They won't move them to do something different. So what we really want to do is understand how this emotion or pathos that Aristotle talked about relates to how we could put this into everyday use. This is your brain on emotion. There's a part of the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is the fight or flight reflex center of the brain. It causes you to feel things long before you think things. So if we were looking and there was a Tyrannosaurus running after us, and we looked at him, you wouldn't think, oh, I think that's a carnivore. And by the trajectory he's running to me, if I don't start running soon, I think I'm going to be lunch. You see a Tyrannosaurus Rex and you just run. You get that instinct. It's a fight or flight reflex center. So we want to make sure that we put that instinct into use. We will judge before we think. The poet Maya Angelou once said, "You may forget what I showed you, you may forget what I told you, but you'll never forget how I made you feel." And that's very true because the amygdala also regulates what goes into short-term memory and what goes into long-term memory. Things that have emotion attached to them go into longer-term memory. So if I ask you, what did you have for lunch last Tuesday? Unless it was your birthday or you choked during lunch or you eat the same thing every day at lunch, you probably don't recall. If I ask you, can you remember a time from your childhood when you were frightened or embarrassed or sad? I'll tell you, I remember the two girls in that hallway like it was yesterday. Like it was yesterday. I'm not going to tell you that story. But it is such a different memory. You don't remember the 10,000 times you drove home, but you remember that time you almost hit a deer because it was emotional to you. So we want to make sure we use that sometimes as a tool to get at the emotion of our listener, to connect to them more readily. So how do we do that? Well, in a couple of ways. The first way is word choice and having things that are more heavily connotated. The words we choose to describe the environment around us really make a difference for us. The other tool is to make it more visual. If I could see it in my mind's eye, it's more likely to be persuasive and connected. And we also want to make numbers concrete. We want to make abstract things become more and more concrete. So if I put this list up of words, which do you think are more heavily connotated? Which have more inherent meaning? The one on the right or the one on the left? Well, most people would say the one on the right. So you might worry, but if you panic, it has more connotation. We're looking for those words only in key sentences or around key messages that really drive us to feel something inherently about it. If we could choose our words carefully around key messages or key points, it has the experience on the listeners and makes it so different. We're more likely to be emotionally attached to it. We're more likely to go into long-term memory. So it's definitely something worth doing. If I put this quote up, you may think, as you're reading it, oh, I know exactly where this is from. This quote is from the Statue of Liberty. Yes, it was a part of a poem written by a poet named Emma Lazarus. Now, I'm not suggesting we speak like this because it's poetry and it may be a little bit tough to get through. But she could have said, for the Statue of Liberty, all are welcome. And it would have meant almost the same thing. But that's not what she wanted to do. She wanted to use this next tool of visualization so that we can see in our mind's eye the journey that they took to get to this new country. So when you read it, you almost have no choice but to remember that this is part of the Statue of Liberty. We like things we could see in our mind's eye. So let's do a little experiment. I want you to visualize an elephant. Now you can't say, I'm not going to play with this woman, I'm not going to see an elephant. You now see an elephant and I know it. Next, I want you to picture a cactus, beach ball, umbrella, boot, water glass, fire hydrant. You can't stop yourself. I could do this all day and force you to see what I say. Rocking chair. You can't stop. Now I want you to kind of clear your mind a little bit. Now I want you to think about these words: efficiency, effectiveness, outcome, success. Are you getting anything? Most people don't, because those words are not visual enough. They're not enough to break through and make us feel something about them. So we want them to be as visual as possible. So a few years ago, I had some dental work done, and I wasn't able to eat chewy candy for a while. So on the day that got resolved, I went to the grocery store and I bought myself a bag of Mike and Ike's, and a bag of those caramels with the little cream in the middle, because they're delicious, and a bag of 1.5 foot long Twizzlers, which were fantastic. So I'm chomping on my Twizzler, thinking about how great these are, and I'm reading the back of the Twizzler bag. It said, last year, we produced enough Twizzlers to rebuild the Eiffel Tower out of licorice. You've all now just seen the Eiffel Tower built out of licorice, right? Because you can't not see that. I may not have remembered if they said, last year we produced 250,000 tons of licorice. Even though I understand that, and I know it intellectually, I don't get it. I don't connect to it, because numbers are very hard to connect to. But I'll never not see an Eiffel Tower built out of licorice. So what we want to do is we want to see if we could get a visualization in the listener's eye. That's why when they talk about recycling, they show the image of water bottles around the equator or trash bags over Mount Rainier. They want to try to make those things more real for you, more visual. If I have the visual image, I connect to it, and because I've connected to it on that level, it goes into long-term memory. I would have never remembered 200,000 tons of licorice. But the Eiffel Tower out of licorice, you can't forget that. So we want to use visualization as often as we can. This is especially true when we have numbers. Numbers are very hard to connect to. We don't process numbers very well. So we want to make numbers as concrete as we can, go from the abstract to the concrete. So if I put this fact up, the disease spread through the US and affected 56,886 people. How do you feel about that? Usually we don't feel anything about that. It's just a fact. But if I make it one step more visual, one step more concrete, and say the disease became an epidemic that swept through the US, infecting enough people to fill New York Yankee Stadium to capacity. You've now just seen a sports arena full of people and hopefully feel something about that. Even if you've never seen New York Yankee Stadium, you've seen a sports arena and you get a sense for how big that number is. Years ago, when they had the Malaysian airliner that went down that has never been found, CNN put together something on that. And I thought, oh, this is going to be so sad. They're really trying to tug at your heartstrings, talking about the victims. They didn't talk about that at all. All they did was talk about square footage of the search area and likened it to finding a needle in a haystack. Well, I was unimpressed by that because I really don't understand that. It's visual, the needle in the haystack, but it's not quantifiable. So they linked the two. And so they said, after many permeations of different things, they said it's like finding your wallet in the Empire State Building. Or it's like finding a pencil eraser on a football field. Or it's like finding a single grain of rice in an Olympic swimming pool. And once they started making those things visual and making the abstract numbers more concrete, I felt something. I felt for those searchers who are never going to find that plane. So we could take something that's very analytical and very exacting and do what Aristotle suggested. He said, put emotion to it. He didn't mean become emotional. He just meant do it in a way that grabs our guts so that we can remember it more fully, so that it connects to us so it goes into longer memory. Basically, he wants us to involve the amygdala. So on certain data points or certain pieces of evidence, if you could use something that makes it more visual for us or makes it more concrete for us, it's gold for the listeners. We really will connect to it more, and you will be well on your road to persuading.